This belongs to me now, Lorraine. My own sister fired me from the company I built, with our parents' blessing. I calmly handed her my keys and said, "Then I hope you can explain to the board why your inheritance is going offline." In exactly 9 minutes. As I walked out, her smug smile began to fade. Hello everyone. Thank you for being here with me today. Before I begin my story, I'd love to know which city you're joining us from. Please feel free to share in the comments. Now, let me take you into this story. They thought kicking me out of my own family, out of the very company I built from the ground up, would be the end of the story. What my sister, my own flesh and blood, didn't know was that I had written the final chapter months ago. My name is Lorraine Vance, and for 25 years, I was the quiet, beating heart of Vance Automations. I wasn't just an employee, I was the architect. I designed the systems our father's modest workshop grew into, the very infrastructure that made us a leader in the industry. But when Dad retired, and my parents decided the company needed a fresh face, they didn't look to the daughter who had built the engine. They looked to the daughter who was better at posing for pictures. They handed my life's work, my legacy, to my younger sister, Beatrice. B. And so on a Tuesday morning, in the conference room that still smelled faintly of the lemon polish our late father insisted on, she made her move. That morning started like any other, until it didn't. At 10:15 a.m., I stepped into that room carrying a binder with the quarterly performance audit I'd stayed up all weekend to finalize. I wasn't expecting a thank you, but I certainly wasn't expecting an ambush. Bea sat at the head of the long mahogany table, in our father's chair, looking like a queen holding court. Her blazer was a sharp, unforgiving white, and her smile was even sharper. Our mother and father were there, seated to her right, their faces set in a practiced, unreadable calm. The rest of the leadership team, people I'd hired and trained myself, were already seated, including Deirdre Mercer. My former mentee, someone I once stayed up until 3 a.m. teaching how to debug a failing relay, back when she didn't know a server rack from a coat rack. Lorraine, Bea said, her voice smooth as glass. She folded her hands on the table, a perfect mirror of how our father used to when he was about to lower the boom. Let's keep this brief. I froze mid-step, the heavy binder suddenly feeling weightless in my hand. She didn't let the silence hang for more than a second. As of this moment, your role as Chief Technology Officer is being dissolved. Effective immediately. The air didn't erupt with gasps. No one shouted in protest. Instead, it thinned into something suffocating, tight, and silent. Eyes dropped to notepads. A pen tapped nervously against a coffee mug. No one moved to object, not even Deirdre. I scanned the room, searching for someone, anyone, with the decency to look me in the eye. My own mother was intently studying a loose thread on her cuff. My father stared at the portrait of his own father on the wall behind me. No one met my gaze. Bea slid a sealed, cream-colored envelope across the table toward me. It landed with a soft, final thud. "You'll find a proposed buyout for your shares outlined in here," she said, her tone suggesting she was discussing the weather. "It's a very generous offer, considering the new direction we're taking. HR will assist you with your exit logistics by noon." The word generous hung in the air, a sour, ugly thing. This wasn't a severance package, this was them trying to buy my silence, to purchase my half of the inheritance for pennies on the dollar. I didn't sit. I didn't touch the envelope. My pulse was steady. Too steady. Because this wasn't a surprise. This exact date, this exact time, 10:15 a.m. on a Tuesday, had been programmed into Sentinel's contingency trigger months ago. When I first heard my parents whispering with Bea about a leadership transition, I knew. If my credentials were ever revoked under hostile conditions, Sentinel would begin a silent lockdown, freezing the company's back-end system layer by layer. They didn't know that. They thought they were just firing their awkward, older daughter. They didn't know they were disconnecting the company from its own heart. I calmly stepped forward, placed my keys and my ID badge on the center of the table, and looked Bea directly in the eye. That smug little curl on her lip didn't even flicker. Understood, I said simply. Then I turned, past Deirdre's downcast face, past the people who once cheered my system launches, past my own parents, and walked out of the room without another sound. Only when the heavy oak door clicked shut behind me did the smile start to form on my face. Not the kind born of happiness, but the kind born of certainty. The countdown had just begun. As I stepped into the elevator that Tuesday morning, just minutes after being publicly cast out by my own family, I didn't break down. I didn't rush to the parking lot to call a lawyer. I simply tapped the button for the ground floor, held my breath for a count of 3, and exhaled. Because this wasn't panic, this was protocol. The ride down gave me time to think, though I didn't need much. The plan had been put in motion the moment my parents signed the papers that made me the CEO. What no one in that building, not even my own mother and father, ever truly understood was that I wasn't just another part of the company. Years ago, before Vance Automations was a rising name in enterprise logistics, it was just Vance and Son, our dad's workshop, teetering on the edge of bankruptcy. The infrastructure was a mess of outdated hardware and spaghetti code my dad had taught himself in the 80s. I was the one who saw a future for it. I was brought in, not officially, just as the daughter who was good with computers. But what I did was more than that. I designed and deployed an internal relay system, one that could sit quietly between every key transaction, from payroll to inventory to client-side logistics, redirecting, validating, and securing data without drawing attention. I called it Sentinel. It wasn't glamorous. It didn't have a flashy launch party like the kind beloved. It was just a smart, silent layer that did what everyone else forgot about. It held the whole thing together. Over time, the company recovered. New deals came in. The infrastructure became bulletproof. They all celebrated the new contracts and rising profits, but no one ever asked how it was all suddenly working so seamlessly. No one questioned it because I made sure Sentinel did one thing better than anything else: it never failed. And they didn't know the most important part. Sentinel didn't live on the Vance Automation servers. When I built it, I saw the instability, not in the tech, but in my family. I saw how my parents fawned over BA's social graces while dismissing my technical achievements. So, I spun up a secure external server cluster, registered under my own small LLC that I'd started in college. Sentinel was deployed through that channel, like a clean bypass cable only I knew existed. Legally, I retained ownership of its core code. Technically, I maintained full control. They used it every day. They just never understood it was never truly theirs to give away as part of BA's inheritance. After Dad promoted me to CTO, a title he gave me with a proud pat on the back, I kept Sentinel's true nature out of the official documentation. It became the invisible spine of our operations. Even Deirdre, who shadowed me for 6 months, never asked about the ghost protocol alerts that only I received. And when my parents started talking about retirement, about BA's natural leadership qualities, I knew. I saw the signs. That's when I coded in the contingency trigger: if my admin credentials are terminated without Sentinel's reauthorization, the system begins a gradual, untraceable shutdown. Not all at once, not violently. Just enough to break everything. So, no, I wasn't afraid when B smiled at me across the conference table. She thought she was erasing an old name from the org chart. She didn't know she was pulling the plug on her own life support. As the elevator dinged open, I walked calmly through the lobby. The receptionist, a young woman B had hired last month, didn't even look up from her phone. I stepped out into the sunlight, crisp and cold, and pulled out my own phone, not to call anyone, just to check the Sentinel activity log. It had begun. 2 days after my dismissal, I was still in a daze, not of shock, but of a strange, hollow quiet. The fury hadn't hit yet. It was more like the eerie calm before a tornado. I spent most of my time in my small apartment, sorting through things I hadn't touched in years. I found my old college textbooks on systems architecture, their pages filled with my own frantic annotations. I found a framed photo of Dad and me in the old workshop, both of us covered in grease, grinning after we'd successfully revived a piece of machinery everyone else had given up on. A part of me just wanted to stay in that memory. Then, an email from B landed in my inbox. It wasn't a personal note. It was a formal notice from HR, CCING her. It said that my transition required me to take on a temporary advisory role for the next 90 days, as per my employment contract, a contract I'd written myself years ago to ensure smooth transitions, never imagining it would be used against me. It was a cage disguised as a courtesy. No office, no team, no direct reports. Just a shared desk in a forgotten corner of the second floor, a place they called the annex, which was really just a glorified storage closet. My badge would still work, but only on select floors. It was clear I wasn't being transitioned. I was being erased, but kept on a leash just in case they needed something. Meanwhile, B was busy painting her new version of Vance Automations. Soft launch posters with empty corporate buzzwords like synergizing tomorrow appeared on the walls. She hired a team that looked like they were cast from a startup fashion catalog. I met them later that week during a mandatory company-wide town hall I was expected to attend for continuity. B introduced her new tech visionaries, a hand-picked squad of bright-eyed, fresh-faced talent pulled mostly from her circle of friends. One of them, a guy named Garrett, couldn't have been more than 28. Slick haircut, perfect teeth, and a smartwatch he kept tapping like it gave him purpose. He spoke with an uncomfortable level of confidence about next-gen workflows. To the board, they looked fresh and disruptive. To me, they looked like a bad investment waiting to implode. On the third day of my new advisory role, I found Garrett in the server staging room, holding a tablet and looking confused. "Hey, you're Lorraine, right?" he asked, not bothering to look up. I nodded. Cool. Quick question. This directory tree here? He turned the tablet toward me. Is it safe to archive this whole cluster? It's not labeled and hasn't been touched in, like, 8 months. My stomach turned. It was Sentinel's decoy structure, an intentionally inert layer meant to misdirect anyone poking around too deep. Deleting it wouldn't break the system, but it would trigger Sentinel's auto-preservation protocols. You shouldn't touch that, I said calmly. It's tied to some legacy workflows for our older clients. Garrett smiled in that dismissive way only the young and unproven know how to wear. No worries. Already queued it for deletion. Got to clean out the cobwebs, right? I didn't argue. I just walked away. A younger version of me would have fought, would have explained, would have tried to save him from himself. But the Lorraine of today, the Lorraine who had been cast out by her own family, just let it happen. What he didn't know was that Sentinel had been trained for moments just like this. What Garrett didn't know, and what no one in BA's army of Instagram-ready engineers knew, was that Sentinel was more than just code, it was a guardian. When it detected a deletion request without matching credentials or origin authorization, my authorization, it didn't just block it. That would be too obvious. Instead, it automatically cloned the affected structure to a shadow drive, masked the original behind a decoy layer, and rewrote the access log to read action completed. To Garrett and the internal dashboard, his command had succeeded. He had cleaned out the cobwebs. In reality, Sentinel had just saved the company from a catastrophic breach of its own operational backbone, and no one even knew. Not B, not Garrett, and especially not Deirdre. Deirdre had gone from my mentee to BA's head of strategic systems transition. She no longer made eye contact with me in the hallway. When she did pass by, her smile was thin, polite, but performative. It was the kind of smile you give a distant relative at a funeral. I had trained her, I had championed her for a promotion when no one else would, I had covered for her mistakes. I taught her how to navigate the complex legacy code our father had left behind. And now she stood shoulder to shoulder with the people replacing me, as if I had never existed. They weren't just replacing talent with trendiness, they were replacing history with style. Still, I didn't protest. I spent my days at that lonely desk in the annex, sipping lukewarm coffee from a paper cup and reading through old manuals I already knew by heart. I let them talk about digital transformation and product-market synergy. Let them gut the system from the outside in. Because for now, Sentinel still held the line, and I still held Sentinel. The illusion of control was theirs. But the architecture, that was still mine. That thought lingered with me as I walked into the demo hall on Thursday morning. The whole floor had been rearranged. Folding chairs formed neat rows in front of a main screen where branded slides rotated on a projector. The title of the presentation was Innovation Sprint, Rethinking the Backbone. I had to stop myself from laughing. The phrase was copy-pasted directly from one of my infrastructure overviews from 5 years ago. Except now, it was being used to dismantle the very thing it once described. BEA's team had invited everyone from engineering, ops, and even marketing. I hadn't been formally asked, but my calendar pinged with a blanket all-staff welcome invite. I took a seat in the far back corner. Quiet. Removed. Unnoticed. Deirdre took the stage alongside Garrett. Both of them looked like they'd just stepped off a TED Talk set. Today, Deirdre began, her voice ringing with false confidence, we're going to show you where Vance Automations is headed. A system that's lighter, faster, and built for scale. We're leaving behind outdated legacy protocols. I watched silently as they walked through a user interface I recognized all too well. It was a new coat of paint, nothing more. The routing logic was still Sentinel. The security sequences were still Sentinel. They didn't even realize the data in their demo was being silently filtered and validated by the very system they were pretending didn't exist. Then it happened. Garrett pulled up a config panel and misused a key term. He called a subnet scheduler a floating token distributor, which made absolutely no technical sense. I couldn't help it. I raised a hand, just slightly, not to embarrass, not to interrupt, just to clarify a point that could have serious security implications. I didn't even speak. But Deirdre saw me. She paused, then forced a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Lorraine, she said into the mic, her voice perfectly modulated for public civility. We appreciate you being here, but since you're no longer part of the active team, let's give the floor to the current architects. A few heads turned. Most didn't. The silence that followed wasn't loud, it was empty. It was the sound of a room full of people all pretending not to notice a small, cruel thing happening in real time. My face grew hot. It was one thing to be fired by my sister, to be dismissed by my parents. It was another to be publicly silenced by the very person I had lifted up, a person who was now standing on the scaffolding I had built for her, kicking the ladder out from under me. I nodded once. No anger, no comment. I stood up and walked to the back of the room, letting the door click shut behind me as I stepped into the hallway. The walls were quiet. The carpet muted my footsteps. I didn't look back. I made my way to the coffee machine by the corner lounge, the old one that always sputtered. It sputtered now as it filled a flimsy paper cup. I sat on the worn gray bench nearby, still holding the untouched coffee. That was when I noticed the intern. A young man from admin was lingering by the hallway, phone in hand, his expression frozen in awkward realization. He had been recording the demo on his phone, as interns often do. What he hadn't expected was to capture that moment. Me being publicly shut down. The room's reaction, or lack of one. We made eye contact. He flushed, lowered the phone, and walked quickly away. By that afternoon, I knew the video had made its way through a few internal chat channels. I overheard it referenced near the elevators. Did you see what happened to Lorraine? Someone whispered. They just cut her off mid-meeting. But no one said anything to me. No apology, no message, no "are you okay?" Just corporate silence. Clean, chilled, impenetrable. The same silence I'd gotten from my parents my whole life when we did something cruel and they chose not to see it. I finished my coffee slowly, my eyes fixed on the floor. My badge still worked. My system access, though limited, still allowed me to view Sentinel's logs. I tapped into the admin monitor from my phone. Unauthorized protocol rename attempt. Failed credential pings. Auto restore complete. Sentinel was still working, still protecting the system from their incompetence. I closed the tab and sat still for another moment, letting the humiliation settle, not as defeat, but as data. They had cut me out of the presentation, but they were still standing on the system I built, and they didn't even know it. That night, I drove home in the dark. The office lights had dimmed behind me, but the humiliation hadn't. It sat in the passenger seat like a ghost I couldn't shake. When I entered my apartment, I didn't bother turning on the lights. I dropped my bag by the door, kicked off my shoes, and headed straight to my desk. I opened my laptop, the familiar glow spilling onto my face. My fingers moved on instinct. A new email. Subject: formal resignation. I stared at the blank body of the message. But halfway through typing a sterile, professional paragraph, I stopped. I hit backspace and deleted it all. On impulse, I opened the Sentinel admin console. One line of code, that's all it would take to wipe Sentinel from their infrastructure. No more safety net. But my hands refused to move. If I did it, innocent people would suffer: clients, tech support, partners. People like I used to be. I leaned back, stared at the ceiling, and heard my father's voice in my head. If they don't see you, make sure they feel you in the results. I returned to the terminal and opened the logs instead. That's when I saw it. Alert. Unauthorized root access attempt. 8:14 p.m. I clicked into the detailed log. Someone had tried to execute a root-level restructure request on Sentinel. That was no routine maintenance. That was a power grab. Sentinel had blocked it, of course. But the request had been disguised. I traced the headers manually. It took less than 30 seconds. The source: b.vance@vanceautomations.com. Beatrice. My sister wasn't just trying to run the company. She was trying to hijack my work, to rewrite the system under her name, to erase me completely. I didn't send the resignation. Instead, I opened a secondary terminal and typed in a new command. Activate watch mode. Trace unauthorized access. Log all attempts in shadow channel. Sentinel blinked back a single confirmation. Monitoring initiated. I closed my laptop. This time, the silence in the room didn't feel empty. It felt loaded. The next morning, an email from HR landed in my inbox at 8:15 a.m. sharp. No greeting, no contact person. Just a cold directive: please schedule a time this week to retrieve your personal belongings. A security escort will be provided as per offboarding protocol. So my 90-day advisory role had lasted less than a week. The cage was no longer needed. They were finally kicking me out for good. It hit harder than I expected. Not because I didn't see it coming, but because it was so impersonal. 25 years, and I was reduced to a line in a corporate checklist. Still, I replied with a single sentence and chose the earliest slot available. I needed to close the loop. Not for them, but for me. When I arrived at Vance Automations later that afternoon, the lobby felt different. Brighter, somehow, like the building itself was trying too hard. The receptionist, the same one who never looked up, finally did, her expression a mixture of pity and discomfort. I gave my name. Moments later, a young man in a navy blazer approached. Ms. Vance. I'm Dylan from security. I'll walk you up. We stepped into the elevator. Neither of us spoke. The third floor, my floor for over 2 decades, looked smaller than I remembered. Or maybe I just stopped seeing it as home. Most of the cubicles had been rearranged. My old office, the one that had been our father's, now had a gleaming new nameplate on the door: Beatrice Vance, CEO. The blinds were half closed. My things had been packed into a medium-sized cardboard box and left on a side desk like an afterthought. No one was waiting for me. No one said hello. I walked in slowly. Dylan stayed at the door, his arms crossed, trying to look official but mostly just looking awkward. Inside the box were the usual remnants: my ceramic mug with the blue skyline print, a couple of notebooks, an old photo of my dad and me at my college graduation. I took my time checking drawers, even though I knew they were supposed to be empty. The top ones held nothing but dust and a single bent paper clip. But the bottom drawer, the one that always jammed, caught my attention. I tugged it open with both hands. Something had slid behind the drawer panel. A yellowed folder, warped at the edges, thick with papers. I pulled it out. Inside were diagrams. My diagrams. The original Sentinel architecture, hand-sketched on engineering vellum. Page after page of structure, node mapping, redundancy layers. In the corner of the first page, faint but unmistakable, was my signature, L. Vance, and my father's, D. Vance. And the date, April 17, 2001. It wasn't just a design. It was the original business charter, the founding document of the company in its modern form, stating in black and white that I was a co-founder with a 50% stake and full ownership of all proprietary foundational systems. The one document my parents and B thought had been lost in an office move years ago. This wasn't nostalgia. This was evidence. This was leverage. I tucked the folder carefully at the bottom of the box, beneath the mug and the framed photo. Dylan shifted at the door, but still said nothing. I nodded to him when I was ready. We walked back through the hall, past people who once called me their tech oracle and now couldn't make eye contact. The elevator ride down was quiet. As I stepped outside, a gust of cold air met my face. For the first time in weeks, I didn't feel numb. I felt the weight of the box in my hands and the power it represented. They thought they were escorting me out like a leftover, but I was walking away holding the one thing they could never recreate. And now I had the proof. As I walked across the parking lot, carrying the last remnants of 25 years in a cardboard box, my phone buzzed softly in my coat pocket. I paused beside my car, shielding the screen from the wind. It was a Sentinel log notification. Status: inactive admin protocol detected. Countdown initiated. 3 hours remaining. No sirens. No flashing lights. Just a quiet signal. I didn't trigger it. I didn't have to. Sentinel was always watching, and it knew the difference between an exit and an exile. By the time I got home, the sky was turning a bruised purple. My apartment was still. I placed the box on the dining table, slid my laptop out from its bag, and powered it on. A familiar hum greeted me as I logged into my private Sentinel console, the version buried behind layers of obfuscation and accessible only through a device I had physically registered years ago. The dashboard appeared. Phase 1 scheduled. Access layer disruption, 2 hours, 47 minutes remaining. I leaned back in my chair, sipping lukewarm tea from a cup. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt still. Sentinel wasn't built to crash the company. It was built to prove one thing, that they never controlled it. From the menu bar, I selected the hidden option labeled Override Protocols and entered a multi-phase command. Initiate Layered Freeze Protocol. Confirm. This wasn't a shutdown. It was a quiet suffocation. Sentinel would start by misaligning user permissions just slightly, enough that credentials wouldn't work the first time. Then it would stagger failures in the system-side scheduling, pausing key processes for milliseconds longer than expected. Emails would queue but not deliver. Dashboards would load incomplete. Financial tools, the ones used to process payroll and client invoices, would freeze at the confirmation stage. All of it timed to hit in intervals across departments. Untraceable, unconnected, chaotic. To the team inside, it would feel like the system was simply tired. I flipped over to the live monitoring feed. Already, Sentinel was recording minor disruptions. 8:42 p.m., payroll API delay. Retry queued. 8:56 p.m., login loop, access timeout, regional manager EU West. 9:01 p.m., financial record desync. Check some mismatch. Nothing big, nothing loud. And that was the point. I wasn't here to burn it all down. Not yet. I was here to make them uncomfortable in the kingdom they had stolen. Across the room, the box I had carried out of the office sat half open. The yellowed folder inside glowed under the lamplight. I didn't need to read it again. Its presence was grounding, real. They had walked me out like I was irrelevant, but I was still in the walls. Still in the wires. The first real ripple hit just after 9 a.m. the next morning. From my apartment window, I watched traffic crawl by like nothing was wrong. But inside Vance Automations, the air would have already shifted. Not full-blown panic yet, just the kind of irritated confusion that makes people whisper harder and refresh their browsers a little more aggressively. It started with payroll. The HR team couldn't access the time tracking module. Logins were accepted, then redirected in loops. Then came the email delays. Internal threads broke apart mid-chain. Some teams switched to group texts. Others began calling desk phones like it was 2006. By 10:30 a.m., the CRM platform refused to sync. Client orders showed as pending when they'd already shipped. And through it all, I watched. Sentinel was doing exactly what I'd designed it to do, not crash the company, just bend it, layer by layer, until it creaked loud enough for everyone to hear. By noon, a company-wide emergency meeting was called. I could imagine the room. B at the front, trying to look in control but annoyed. Deirdre beside her, stiff-jawed, flipping through half-formed explanations about the system transition. It must have been brutal, because by 1:15 p.m., Deirdre's name showed up in multiple log entries, trying to ping legacy environments and requesting access to directories that had been dead for years. Meanwhile, Sentinel's freeze protocol was still only in phase 2. Just enough to confuse them. But then came the twist. At 3:04 p.m., a junior systems engineer, Russell Pham, logged into a diagnostic shell. He ran a deep trace scan on the CRM pipeline and found a non-index relay command buried inside the transaction buffer. The command had a name, sentinel_proxy.root.log. He tried to open it. Sentinel rejected the attempt. He ran it again, this time using a limited access override. Sentinel didn't block him outright. It offered a message, secure biometric credential required. Voice signature mismatch. Russell, probably thinking it was a leftover test module, tried checking who created the original signature. And there it was. Credential owner, L. Vance, archived. I paused when I saw the log alert on my own dashboard. My hands were steady, but I didn't move them. They'd finally tripped over the bones of the system. Russell didn't have the clearance to go further. The system kicked him out and returned him to the main console. I imagined him frowning at his screen, then glancing toward Deirdre, debating whether to mention the name he saw. And then I imagined B hearing that name, my name, and feeling her throat tighten. From my living room, I watched Sentinel automatically scrub the access path Russell had uncovered, nesting the log one layer deeper. I didn't smile. Not yet. But I felt something bloom in my chest. They were beginning to feel it. The cracks, the gaps in their control. And no matter how many firewalls they threw at it, they would never reach the core. Because the core was me. And I never gave them the keys. By the next morning, the cracks had become undeniable. The facade of control B had tried to maintain was unraveling. They'd spent the entire previous day chasing ghosts, but today, they realized it wasn't going away. I knew my sister well enough to predict her next move. She wouldn't admit fault, she would find someone to blame. At 8:20 a.m., a new set of encrypted IPs were granted temporary access. She had called in outside help, cybersecurity contractors. The goal was clear, find the bug, the virus, the saboteur. Wipe everything and start fresh. But Sentinel wasn't built to be rebooted. It had me. I watched from my console as the external team began their probe. The lead engineer, a man named Sterling Maddox, judging by his login ID, was clever. It took him only 20 minutes to realize something didn't add up. He identified a hidden thread buried beneath the real-time analytics engine and flagged it for escalation. Then came the bypass attempt. Maddox wrote a custom script designed to penetrate nested virtual partitions. On his fourth try, he triggered Sentinel's containment response, a soft firewall route, a warning shot. He didn't stop. On attempt 5, his script ran a brute force simulation, hammering through false paths until it nearly found Sentinel's access seed. For a moment, I felt a sharp pinch of anxiety. He was too clever. I held my breath. Then, Sentinel moved. Access anomaly detected. Unrecognized admin authority. Revoking permissions. In less than a second, Sterling Maddox's entire credentials were deleted from the internal system tree. Every clearance, every alias, every access path, gone. To the network, it was as if he'd never existed. I exhaled slowly. Back inside Vance Automations, the logs showed rising tension. B issued a temporary lockdown of all admin terminals. Deirdre attempted to reassign the probe to internal staff, but it was too late. The story was shifting. What had started as a system hiccup was now becoming something bigger. Something deliberate. That afternoon, the letter arrived. It came to my personal email, the subject line sterile, notice of legal inquiry, Vance Automations. Inside was a formal accusation drafted by the family's lawyer. In it, they alleged I had intentionally compromised the company's infrastructure, introduced malicious code, and violated my confidentiality agreement. They never used my name outright, just vague claims about a former employee with high-level clearance. There were veiled threats about litigation, demands for a written response. My hands went cold. They had fired me, tried to erase me, and now they were trying to destroy me. My own family was accusing me of being a criminal. Underneath the fury, there was a calm awareness. I stood, walked to the shelf beside my desk, and pulled out the cardboard box. I opened the yellowed folder. There it was, the original business charter, drawn in ink, annotated in pencil. My signature, my father's signature, a time-stamped artifact of authorship. I hadn't built Sentinel for them. I had built it with my father, and I had brought it with me into the modern age. I called my attorney, an old friend who had helped me with minor patent protections years ago. After I forwarded her the email and a scan of the charter, she called back almost immediately. "They don't know what they just walked into, Lorraine," she said flatly. "This isn't just a bad faith accusation. It's borderline defamation. And you have airtight proof that you're not just an employee, you're the co-founder." I let out a slow breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding. The pressure in my chest loosened. Not because the fight was over, but because I now had the leverage to finish it. The next morning, my attorney submitted a response. It was short, professional, and attached to it was the scanned charter, dated, signed, and irrefutable. And just like that, the silence on their end became louder than anything they'd ever said to me. The cracks had reached the top floor. After a week of operational chaos and a legal threat that had backfired spectacularly, the board and the primary investors had no choice. A private, high-level emergency meeting was scheduled for Friday morning. It was supposed to be a show of control from B. Instead, it became her unraveling. I wasn't there, of course. But Sentinel was. It had been silently invited into the meeting via a shared audit file Deirdre had uploaded for transparency, not realizing Sentinel could see everything inside it. I watched from my apartment as the video feeds flickered on. B stood at the head of the boardroom table, visibly tense. She blamed the recent outages on a residual infrastructure flaw left over from a previous era, a subtle jab at me. A few heads nodded. Then came the question that shattered the script. A voice from the upper right corner of the screen, deep and calm. Who owns the core operating system, Beatrice? Is it proprietary to Vance Automations, or is it licensed? It was Mr. Alistair Sterling, a senior equity partner and one of our dad's oldest and dearest friends. He was more than an investor, he was family. Or so I thought. B blinked. It was built internally, years ago. It's legacy architecture. A beat of silence followed. Then Mr. Sterling's voice returned, colder this time. That's not what I recall. Everyone turned their heads. I had lunch with your father a month before he passed. We spoke about the future, about his inheritance plans for you both. He was immensely proud of you, B, of your people's skills. But he told me, and I quote, B is the face, but Lorraine is the foundation. She built the engine, and I've made sure she's protected. Mr. Sterling leaned forward, his eyes finding the camera. He was worried you and your mother would try to push her out. He told me about a document, a founding charter, that he and Lorraine signed together, ensuring she would always have control of her intellectual property. He said he'd put it somewhere safe for her. Have you, by any chance, seen that document, Beatrice? BEA's face lost its color. Deirdre went completely still, her hands frozen above her keyboard. The room on screen seemed to hold its breath. Someone finally asked, so the system isn't entirely ours? Mr. Sterling's gaze never left my sister. I'm beginning to wonder if this company ever truly was. I watched from my apartment as Sentinel captured every second. I didn't smile, not fully, but my jaw relaxed. It was the first time someone in power had said my name and attached it to what I built, not what they tried to erase. B fumbled for a response, but the damage was done. You can't lie to the man who holds the checkbook and the truth. The meeting ended 20 minutes early. No decisions made, no reassurances offered. Just big, expensive questions. If you've listened this far, please do me a huge favor, like this video and comment with the number 1 below. It lets me know that you've given me a like, and it tells me you're right here with me on this journey. Your support is a tremendous encouragement, and it truly cheers me on. Please, comment with the number 1, and listen as I tell you the rest of my story. Just 2 days after that explosive board meeting, my attorney called. The board, led by Mr. Sterling, had given B and my parents an ultimatum: either face a massive lawsuit for shareholder fraud and breach of fiduciary duty, or agree to a new arrangement. The arrangement was simple. My parents and B would be bought out. All of their shares. Not at the insulting price they had offered me, but at a fair market value determined by an independent auditor. Where would the money come from? Mr. Sterling and a consortium of the other original investors had offered to finance it. They weren't just investing in a company, they were investing in a leader they could trust. They were investing in me. The offer came with a condition. I would return, not as CTO, but as CEO. I would take my father's chair, the one B had so eagerly claimed. I didn't hesitate. This wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about reclaiming my legacy, about honoring the promise I'd made to my father to protect what we had built together. The transition was quiet and swift. There was no big announcement. One day, BA's name was on the door, the next, it was gone. She and my parents took the buyout. I haven't spoken to them since. Sometimes, the silence is the loudest message of all. My first act as CEO was to call a company-wide meeting. I stood at the head of that same mahogany table, but I didn't feel like a queen. I felt like a builder, ready to get back to work. I started by calling back the loyal, experienced employees B had let go. I kept Russell Pham, the young engineer who had found the first clue, and gave him a promotion. He had the curiosity and integrity that I wanted to build the future of the company on. As for Deirdre, I called her into my office that first afternoon. She walked in, pale and nervous, expecting to be fired. I just looked at her and said, I taught you everything you know about this system, Deirdre. But I never taught you about loyalty. Your desk needs to be cleared out by 5. There was no shouting, no drama. Just a quiet, final end. I began the long process of untangling the mess we had made. But first, I had one more command to type into my private console. Deactivate layered freeze protocol. Restore all systems to optimal function. Sentinel blinked back, all systems green. Welcome back, admin. 6 months have passed since that day. The company is stable again, growing not with flashy gimmicks, but with the solid, reliable performance I've always believed in. We've landed 2 of the biggest contracts in our history. The employees, the old ones and the new ones, work with a renewed sense of purpose. We are a team again. Last week, I was working late, reviewing the final schematics for a new system expansion. I looked around the office, my father's office, and saw the framed photo of him and me in the old workshop. I finally felt like I was home. I renamed the core system. It's no longer just Sentinel. It's now the Vance Legacy System, a tribute to the man who gave me the tools, and to the daughter who learned how to use them. From my window, I can see the skyline of the city we helped build. The lights flicker on, one by one, each one a connection, a transaction, a promise kept. The empire my sister tried to steal is now stronger than ever, built not on a pretty face, but on a foundation of integrity. And I smile. Not wide, not wicked, just enough. Because I knew something they never learned. You can try to silence a person, but you can't erase the mind that built the foundation. Sometimes, power doesn't need to shout. Sometimes, it just needs to outlast the noise. If you've ever felt unseen, especially by your own family, or had to fight for what was rightfully yours, please share your story in the comments below. Your stories matter, and they deserve to be heard. If my journey resonated with you, a like would mean the world to me, and sharing this video might just help someone else who feels alone in their fight. And don't forget to subscribe, because every family has its secrets, and some stories just have to be told.